What's up, guys, and welcome back to From the Nosebleeds, a podcast brought to you by myself, Walter Limbeck, and Jacob Wetzel. Right now, I am doing a season preview for college football leading up to the season, breaking it down conference by conference. I'm actually going outside of conferences this time and dipping my toes into the independent teams that aren't affiliated or associated with a conference. I think it's important to touch on these teams because we had some success with a couple of these teams last year. And I think there's a couple teams that will be successful again this year from the independent groups. We'll start out with BYU. The Darlings of last year went 11-1 last year. Their lone loss coming at Coastal Carolina. Other than that, they ran through their schedule. There's a lot of complaints about how easy their schedule was, things of that nature, but they still played and won a majority of their games. Going 11-1 is impressive. I don't care who you play against. They had a lot of key losses, a lot of seniors going, a decent amount of players getting drafted. Among those key losses, Zach Wilson, the number 2 overall pick, Brady Christensen, one of the better offensive linemen from last year, Dax Milline, their top wideout from last year. However, they do return some key pieces. Tyler Algier, I probably messed that up, had over 1,100 yards rushing and 13 touchdowns last year. Former linebacker converted into a running back, really exploded onto the scene last year with all the success that BYU had. Another running back, Lopini Keitoa, is more of a change of pace back, has really good hands. Actually, funny enough, is one of their top receivers that's returning this year. He adds another dimension to the offense that they don't necessarily get with Tyler. And also returning a freshman standout tight end, Isaac Rex, who had 12 touchdowns as a freshman, enough to earn him All America honors. We'll see how he follows up his freshman campaign. You also have the Romney brothers. Gunnar Romney is has the most returning yards on the team, and Baylor Romney looks to be in charge after spring ball of the quarterback positions. However, a rising star, Jacob Conover, could become the starting quarterback. There's a lot of buzz surrounding him as being the next future quarterback of BYU for years to come. After an easier schedule last year, they've got a lot tougher of a lot tougher schedule this year. I'll introduce some key games here in 2021 for the Cougars. They host Arizona week 1 in Las Vegas, host Utah the following week, host Arizona State the following week after Utah, then host Boise State later on in the year, at Baylor, at Wazoo, hosting Virginia, and at USC. If you look at those games, that's 8 games there. If they go 4-4 there, or even 3-5 in that stretch, they'll be sitting at 7 wins, which brings me to their over under win total prediction. I think they get to at least 7 wins. Right now on Vegas, they have them at 6.5 for the season. So obviously, you got to take the over there. I think they win at least 3 of those. You've got 5 of those 8 games at home. Well, technically 4 at home, 1 at a neutral site, but that neutral site favors them more. I think they can beat Arizona. I think they can beat Virginia, and then you toss up a win on the road there against Baylor or Wazoo. I think they could beat one of those teams on the road. So I think they get 3 wins there. So I think they get to 7 wins at least this year. Who knows? Maybe they're a little better than expected and pick up 8 wins, but I think 7 is very attainable for this team. They're starting 12 underclassmen and only have 2 senior starters, so this is really more of a buildup for the coming years, and that's why I think you could see Jacob Conover eventually take over the starting quarterback position. This is a very young team, started looked to be starting a decent amount of freshmen. I mentioned the 12 underclassmen, only 2 seniors, so it's more about building for the years to come. I think they're about a year or 2 away from really being back to where they were in 2020. Next, we'll talk about Notre Dame, who went 10-2 and had a college football playoff appearance last year. Maybe play Bama closer than anybody else. I know that's not necessarily true, but scoreboard wise, it is true. They had a nice win against Clemson earlier in the year and then lost in the conference title game later on in the year. So they ended the year 10-2, losing their last two. They lost a lot. They only returned 8 starters. I'd say technically 9 because of Michael Mayer. Among their key losses, Ian Book, their quarterback, Jeremiah Awusa, Koromoa, their linebacker, and Liam Eichenberg, one of the best offensive linemen last year in the country. However, they do return some key pieces. Kyle Hamilton, their leading tackler at free safety. This guy is a do-it-all safety. He's flying all over the football field. He's pretty big for his safety. I'm sure he'll probably be high on a lot of people's mock draft boards at going into the year, and then at the end of the year, Kai will probably be another All-American year for him. Another key piece returning is Kyron Williams, the running back out of St. Louis, Missouri. Guy had a phenomenal year last year, rushing for over 1,100 yards, having 13 touchdowns to go along with that. Also had over 300 yards receiving, pretty decent numbers for him. He's the heart and soul of this offense, especially this year with Ian Book departing. Another key piece coming back is Michael Mayer, a tight end that you should get familiar with. This guy is very good. He had 42 catches last year as a true freshman. He had over 400 yards receiving. This guy will be a big piece for them in the next couple of years. And I'm sure maybe next year or maybe the year after, he's probably going to get taken in the NFL draft. This guy's got a good build at 6'4", 250 pounds. He's got solid hands. I really like what I've seen from him. Another player to watch out for is Jordan Johnson. Jordan Johnson was brought in last year as a recruit to help their receivers from an athleticism standpoint as well as a speed standpoint, as that's something they lacked at the receiving position. They had more big bodies, kind of route runners, whereas this is more of a dynamic, explosive player. He's somebody that will be probably featured a lot more this year, whereas last year he wasn't featured as much. He will probably break through a little more this year. Keep an eye on him. I'd also keep an eye on Tyler Buckner. He's probably the future starting quarterback. They brought in Jack Cohn to kind of help bridge the gap between Ian Book and him, in my opinion. This guy was one of their top recruits this year. He's from La Mesa, California. He looks to be the starting quarterback of the future. Again, I think Jack Cohn's more there to bridge the gap. And that's kind of what you're going to see from Notre Dame this year. I think they're going to take a step back. And again, like BYU, they're building more for the future. They do have some really good pieces, but still not quite there yet, not quite as good as they were last year. I think they'll still be very competitive, but they brought in some transfers to kind of bridge the gap between last year's team and the future. They had a top 10 recruiting class this year. So I think they're really more focused on building for the future. They always have a very solid offensive line. Kyron Williams will take a lot of pressure out off whoever is at quarterback, and steady hands Michael Mayer over the middle will also help with that. So I still think they're a solid team. Their win total projection is at 9. I don't know if I'd take the over or under because I think they're right at 9. Honestly, you look at some of the key games they have this year: at Florida State to start the year, Wisconsin in Chicago at Soldier Field, hosting Cincinnati, at Virginia Tech, hosting USC, hosting UNC, at UVA, at Stanford to end the year. I think at Stanford's a win for them, but other than that, you look at that schedule right there that I just listed out. You got 7 tough games. If they win 4 of those, they get to 9 wins, in my opinion. But you got some tough road games at Florida State. I think Florida State's going to take a big step in year 2 under Norvell. I don't think they're going to be competing for the ACC, but I think they're going to be competitive in a lot of games. And having to go in there week 1 is going to be a tall task for Notre Dame, especially when you're replacing a lot of key pieces and you're bringing in some younger guys. Wisconsin Soldier Field, that'll be friendly for Notre Dame. There is a large Notre Dame following in Chicago. I think that'll be more of a home game for them than a neutral site game. Wisconsin's still a very good team. Bringing Cincinnati in, with Cincinnati returning a lot and going to a New Year's Six Bowl last year, and they return a lot of those guys. That's a tough game. At Virginia Tech, there's a lot of question marks about Virginia Tech. That's also a tough game, though. Anytime you have to go to Virginia Tech and play there, it's hard. USC coming in, that's a big rivalry game. I think USC is a little better than them. UNC coming in, there's a lot of hype surrounding UNC this year. That's another tough game at UVA. Virginia was a lot more competitive in games than their record suggests from last year. Bronco Mendenhall is doing good things over there in Charlottesville. That's another tough game in my opinion. You look at all 7 of those games that I just listed. That's a tough slate. I think they get to 3 or 4 of those wins, and then lose 3 or 4 of those. It could go either way. You could go over. You could go under the win total. I think it's just a tougher schedule for Notre Dame, in my opinion. Even though the record of these teams from last year might not suggest it, I think a lot of these teams are going to take steps forward this year and be more competitive and be better and be more towards the top in their conference. So I think it's just overall just a pretty tough schedule for them, and it's a tall task to ask them to get to 10 wins and be in the conversation for a New Year's Six Bowl. I think 9 wins is more realistic. Again, this is more of a gap year for them. The next team we'll talk about is a team I really like, and I really like how their schedule lays out for them. Liberty. This could be this year's BYU, in my opinion. They've got a lot of seniors. They've got a very dynamic quarterback who could fly up draft boards. They've got an experienced defense. Hugh Freeze is a coach who knows how to win. Whether he wins the right way or not, that's up for you to decide. However, he does win. The 2 years he's been in Liberty, he's gotten the team 18-6. That's an 8-win year. And last year, they had a 10-win year, including an exciting victory over Coastal Carolina in their bowl game. Their lone loss last year was at NC State. It was an ugly game. Probably shouldn't have lost the game, but they ended up losing. It was a weird game that they lost, but all things considered, this is a very good team. Like I mentioned, Malik Willis, get familiar with him now. I'm sure he'll be in talks for a Heisman this year. He'll be kind of a dark horse. He's a very good quarterback. Again, he might fly up draft boards. Dual threat, very good. They have a favorable schedule. Looking at their schedule, they've really got, I'd say, 4 to 5 tough games At Syracuse, who knows how that will be? I think they come out with a victory in that one. At UAB is a very good group of 5 team, but I think they come out with a victory there. At Ole Miss, that could be a huge game. Hugh Freeze going back to Ole Miss, school that he had to get away from because of all the allegations that came out. That could be a huge game because they could be undefeated up to that point, and that could be fireworks. Two very dynamic offenses going against each other, in my opinion. Both offense will be high flying, high scoring this year. And then the following 2 games to end the year, Louisiana at home and Army at home. I think that Louisiana game could be huge because if they beat Ole Miss, them and Louisiana both might be undefeated or around the 10-win range still there. So that could be a huge game, not only in terms of being undefeated or not, but also just for a New Year's Six Bowl. Those are 2 teams that might be competing for a spot in the New Year's Six Bowl as the group of 5 representative. Army, I think, will take a step back a little bit this year after a strong performance last year and the year before, but I still think that's a pretty tough schedule to end the year. You got at Ole Miss, Louisiana, and Army. I think those are their 3 toughest games, in my opinion. And I think if I had to say their only loss is going to come at Ole Miss, I think this team gets to 11 wins, and probably ranked towards the end of the year. Their win or their over under, excuse me, win total projection is at 9. I'd take the over and I'd take that easily. It's sitting about even money right now, so I would suggest getting on that before it starts to inflate a little bit because I think a lot of people are going to be on that. Next, we'll talk about Army, a team who's got a very likable coach in Jeff Monken. He's done some good things there at Army, getting them back on the winning ways in their most important game against Navy. Last year, 9-3, had a nice year, lost at Cincinnati, at Tulane, and then lost their bowl game against West Virginia. Even though they were still competitive, they run that patented triple option offense. This is a good team. They lose a decent amount of starters on offense, but return a decent amount on defense. I think they'll rely on that defense a little more this year because they lose so much on offense. And I mean, that offense wasn't necessarily that great last year, but they should have a pretty rock solid defense again this year. I think their win total projection is right around 8. I think they're going to be right around that territory. I wouldn't suggest the over or under because I think it could go either way. They've got a little bit tougher schedule this year than last, with the group of 5s being able to play more Power 5s this year. I think a key player to watch out for on this team is Eric Smith, a senior linebacker. This guy could end up getting drafted. He's very talented. Led the team in tackles last year, also returning leader in sacks for the team. So he's kind of a do-it-all middle linebacker. Really like his game, and he's a key player to watch out for them. The next team we'll talk about is the UConn Huskies. They took 2020 off due to the pandemic, so they haven't played in over a year. They've got Randy Edsall back at the helm. They've got only they've got a decent amount returning from 2 years ago that played with them 2 years ago. So they've returned 15 starters in total from 2 years ago. That's actually pretty good considering they had the year off. This is still not a very good team overall. They went 2-10 in 2019, and I think they'll be around 3-2 wins this year. There's really not a whole lot to talk about with them or to like outside of DJ Morgan, their outside linebacker. I think he could be very good. Could be a key part of this defense and key part of them maybe surprising a few teams. but I think Etzel's still a few years away. He's had success there previously, brought them to a New Year's Six Bowl in his first time as a head coach there. I think he's still got some work to do, and they're a couple years away, in my opinion. The last two teams we'll talk about are New Mexico State and UMass. I'll talk about them together. These are two teams not very good, that are not very good. New Mexico State didn't play at all in 2019. UMass played 4 games, lost all 4 games, and they lost all 4 games by over 20 points. And if you look at New Mexico State, they only had two losses in 2019 that came by single digits against Liberty and against their rival New Mexico. They won 2 games in 2019, but one of those was to a FCS school. Both these teams are not very good. New Mexico State returned 0 starters from 2 years ago. They've got a lot of new players coming in. On the defense, they returned 0 starters from that defense in 2019. They only returned 2 starters from that offense in 2019. So there's a lot of turnover, a lot of new pieces. It's going to be a tough year, frustrating year for UMass, or for New Mexico State, excuse me. And UMass, despite playing last year and not looking very good, I think they've got a little more positives to take away from last year. It's Walt Bell's 3rd year at the helm. They've only won 1 game. I think they'll take a step forward, not a giant step, but a small step. And I think they'll win maybe 2 or 3 games this year. So I think they're moving slowly but surely in the right direction. They returned 5 starters on offense and 8 starters on defense. So a little more optimism for UMass. And those are my takeaways from the independent schools. Next, I will be talking about the Sunbelt schools. So stay tuned for that. If you haven't already, check out my preview for the MAC and Conference USA in this series, and look forward to more content coming out as we approach the college football season.